Okay, my name is Mark Groubert, and a lot of people have many hobbies. My particular hobby is collecting memorabilia of mass murderers, and specifically throughout the 20th century. That's my area of study. And over the years, I've collected some of the rarer items that are available today in the open market. Some of these go for quite a bit of money, and let's see where we could start off. Maybe we could start off right here, right with a very popular mass murder of his time. Let's start off with Mr. Albert Fish. Now, Albert Fish, in case a lot of you didn't know that, was nicknamed the Moon Maniac because most of his murder and decapitation and cannibalism, which was his specialty, was done usually during a full moon. And hence, that's where he picked up his moniker, Albert Fish, the Moon Maniac. The item I have in front of me here, if you can take a look at this, is a leather harness that Mr. Fish used to restrain 11-year-old Grace Budd, who he kidnapped and later made into a succulent human stew. Albert Fish, who was a masochist, he was a cannibal, he was a ghoul, he was a necrophiliac, plus a father of 7. Good family man by those days' standards. He was born in 1906 and died in 1951. You can have a look here. It's a very rare comic art of the 20s of Albert Fish. One of his pet peeves was to take very, very large sewing needles and implant them in his body. He also paid local neighborhood children to paddle him with wooden paddles implanted with 2 to 4 inch roofing nails, and these were applied to his naked buttocks on alternate Tuesdays and Thursdays. Oh, right over here, if you can have a look at this rope, this was the actual rope used by Harvey Glattman. Harvey Glattman's nickname was, of course, the Rope Murderer. His modus operandi, basically, was to lure girls out into the desert outside of Los Angeles, saying he was a fashion photographer, where he utilized the rope to strangle them to death. Mr. Glattman apparently used this device, this particular one right here, for over 33 homicides of young models in the LA area during the 1950s. One of the interesting sidelights, when his mother was interviewed by the police at the time, it was determined that Mr. Glattman was an award-winning Eagle Scout who specialized in, of all things would have it, knot tying as an Eagle Scout, won many awards. His handiwork later came in very handy for himself in his bizarre profession. Harvey Glattman, the Rope Murderer. This is the magazine for the Mass Murderer Collector. It's the only one of its kind, and it comes out on a bi-monthly basis. Some of the features you might find in Death Rattle, in this case, feature a story on Ed Gein, who was also a necrophiliac, mass murderer, ghoul, cannibal, had a whole list of careers behind him and a very long resume of murder. In fact, Ed Gein was the model for Mr. Bates in the Alfred Hitchcock classic Psycho. One of Ed Gein's favorite things was to dig up fresh corpses, prepare them in a succulent stew, and his hobby was to take their skulls and shape them into soup bowls, where he would display them on top of his fireplace. He had over 24 of those collected, and he also had a nice series of cups and saucers. The work that he did was based on his taxidermy, where he learned his trade. He was also a collector of human skin. People today are trying to put together a recipe book based on Ed Gein's cookbook, which they're trying to put out right now. One of the most famous jokes at the time, when he was in Wisconsin doing his dastardly deeds, was the question, what did Ed Gein keep in his cookie jar? And the answer among the school children of the day was, of course, ladyfingers. Richard Speck was one of the first big-name mass murderers in the 60s, performing his job in 1966 in Chicago. Richard murdered 9 nurses in a span of 3 hours in a boarding house in Chicago, and he was one of the first contemporary mass murderers of his day. Tattooed on his left arm was the saying, "Born to raise hell," which was his most famous saying of his era. If we can take a look over here on the right, this is one of my proudest pieces of my collection. This is the actual nurse's outfit worn by Maria Papino, the Filipino nurse who was the only survivor of the massacre. She was the 10th nurse who hid underneath a bed and somehow survived the orgy of blood that had occurred in that boarding house in 1966 of April 15th. Also, you see here the underwear of one of the nurses who actually didn't survive the massacre. That was Maria Carmelito, and this was part of the evidence that helped to convict Richard Speck to 13 concurrent life sentences, adding up to over 1,300 years. Richard is eligible for parole somewhere in the year 2207. So I don't think we're going to be seeing Richard around the unemployment line for a very long while. Also in the collection is a shoe worn by the same nurse. You see here the bloodstains depicting the viciousness of the crime. It was a heinous crime, and one of the nurses involved, her father was the chief of police of Chicago and helped to crack the case back then. Moving over here, we see a couple of items. This is the axe used by Charlie Little Red Starkweather, who was the James Dean of mass murderers. He performed his function in the Midwest, in Nebraska and Ohio during the 50s, and had a very large following of Bobby Soxers, who considered him a cult idol at the time. He performed his acts with his axe, right here, with his 14-year-old girlfriend, who was later sentenced to life imprisonment. One of the items I picked up in my travels is the actual scalp of Bo Carter. This was used in the trial to help convict Charlie Starkweather back in 1956. It's a very, very rare, beautiful piece of my collection, which I would never part with. Well, here's one of my favorites, Howard Unruh. Let's take a look at Howard. Howard, of course, from Camden, New Jersey. Let's see if we can get a shot of Howard. He was a marksman, and he had sort of what they call battle fatigue in those days. Howard was holed up in his attic for many years. The neighborhood kids would always tease him. And one day Howard sort of snapped, went downtown and killed every businessman in Camden. After running out of bullets, he merely sat on the sidewalk waiting for the authorities to take him away. And his most famous quote as he was being arrested by the Camden police was, "I'm no psycho." No story would be complete without the, oh, here he is right here. Right next to Mr. Unruh, we see the famous Charles Joseph Whitman, immortalized in the Kinky Friedman tune, The Ballad of Charles Joseph Whitman. One of the classic lines being, there was a rumor about a tumor nestled at the base of his brain. That might have been true, it might not have been true. He was an Eagle Scout, he was a marksman. He climbed to the University of Austin, Texas Tower with over 2 trunks of ammunition and began opening fire on everyone in sight, killing 23 and wounding 17. Now, statistically, Charles Whitman had the record for the most mass murders in a single day. This record held up for over 11 years until it was broken by this man here, if I can get a shot of him, the famous McDonald's killer of 3 years ago, Mr. James Uberty, who was a security guard. He broke Charlie's record by he broke Mr. Whitman's record by killing an additional 4 people in the same period of time, hence earning him the crown, the biggest mass murderer in current American mass murderer history. But, as Joe DiMaggio said, records are made to be broken. I've got a very nice personalized collection of books and novels related to mass murderers. Let's take a look at a couple here. For instance, the Helter Skelter book, written by the DA, the prosecuting attorney in the case, Vincent Bugliosi. Helter Skelter, of course, we all know about the Manson killings, Sharon Tate, LaBianca. But this copy is a little bit different. It's a little bit worn, as you can see. I've been utilizing it for many years. And if you can get a close-up here of the inscription, you'll see that this is a copy handed to me by the man himself, the son of man, Charlie Manson. Here's a book about Ted Bundy, the all-American boy who killed many women. He was a very good-looking man. Let me just point out the inscription here from Ted. This is one of my more prized possessions, since he is slated to go to the chair in Rayford, Florida within a month. Time is apparently running out for Ted. One of the most good-looking of all the mass murderers. That's his claim to fame. Let me just see if I can find a picture of the handsome devil here. The man was being groomed at a time when he was graduating law school to actually run for the U.S. Congress. This is the book by Darcy O'Brien. The two gentlemen, both of Italian origin, Kenneth Bianchi and Anthony Buono, ran a auto repair shop in Los Angeles. Their specialty was to pick up prostitutes and hookers around the area, basically on Hollywood Boulevard, take them back to their humble abodes, tie them up, gag them, and then place live electric wires on their hands and feet until they were dead. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you find something of interest here. There's a little bit of something for everyone. And if you have any further questions, please contact me through this agency. I thank you very much, and good night.